Welcome to the History Internet podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Today, John Bacon, his book, Gales of November. Listen, Shipping on the Great Lakes, it's about the Edmund Fitz, but it's about a ton of other stuff around that. There has been tons of books on the Edmund Fitz. I've read a good amount of them. And let me tell you something. To me, this is the definitive account. He's got it all. It's amazing. Shipwrecks, rescues, all sorts of things about the Great Lakes and how shipping works out there. Super interesting. I had a great time. How about I shut up? Let's bring on John and talk about it. And here we are with author John U. Bacon, The Gales of November, The Untold Story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. John, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Brendan. My pleasure.
Real quick question for you. Do you think your life has been a bit easier than most because your last name is absolutely delicious?
Who can measure these things? I've got nowhere to compare it, but I can say what's good about the last name of Bacon, for all the jokes you got in second grade, I got in second grade and so on. People spell it correctly, they pronounce it correctly, they remember it, they laugh at it, and you get a call back. So you know what? It probably has helped.
I think it's good. Now, I did some digging. Looked in my research. I wanted to verify for people that have seen some of your TED Talks. Can you confirm that your high school record of 86 games and no goals is still standing at your high school?
Yes. In fact, I would say that the most games in the year in uniform, all of them, 86 games, 3 years, and 0 goals is going to be very hard to beat. Not bragging, just saying, Brendan.
Listen, I hope they have it up on the wall so you never have to worry about people forgetting.
There you go. That comes from a previous book, Let Them Lead, Unexpected Lessons in Leadership from America's Worst High School Hockey Team. We're working on the third draft of the screenplay, actually, and we have some people interested, so we'll see what happens there. But I do a lot of public speaking based on that book.
Listen, I love them. I highly recommend, after they finish this book, of course,
there you go,
to go and watch those as well.
Perfect.
Listen, we're talking the Mighty Fitz, the Edmund Fitzgerald. There are books on this. Like, I've read a couple, and there's been a few. What made you decide that there was still something to tackle here? It's a bit intimidating, right? Because people know this story.
Sure, in some ways it certainly is. And behind me, although I know we're audio only for your show, I've got a bookshelf full of books, 4 shelves worth, that I used for this book. And the top shelf is just books about the Edmund Fitzgerald. 15, 20 easily. So there's plenty of competition out there. Most of it is regional, not national publishers. But I thought, and the title of my book, as you know, is The Gales of November, The Untold Story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The untold part in my case is, yes, we do diminish some theories about why it sank and amplify others based on my findings and my research. So there'll be some news there, I think. But the real untold story is no one ever talked to the crew members, the ones who knew the crew before those guys, of course, went on their last journey. All 29 men were lost. But I came across 6 guys who served on the Fitz and knew the crew and knew what they did. I talked to 9 families of the 29 who were very helpful, helping me recreate what their lives were like, who they were, what their families were like, and so on, what their work was like. So that's the untold part, I think, and that's what really drove me, is turning the 29 men, which everyone knows from the song, into 3-dimensional people.
As somebody I'm huge into shipwreck stories, it's just something that I can't get enough of. Reading books on the Edmund Fitz, I definitely have to say, you are taking that personal approach. The amount of interviews, families, all of those people that you talk to, it really comes through that, A, you enjoyed talking to these people, and B, that they enjoyed talking to you and telling this story. I know you're an experienced journalist and author, but is there any hesitation when you start this? Like, you're talking about some of these people's worst events of their lives. Do you have to go in there with a certain way about you, or do you find these people are just dying to talk more about this?
We're definitely not dying to talk more about this. That part is undeniably not true, and I can understand why. It's been, when I started, 3 years ago, basically, it had been 47 years since the tragedy. And even if you were a 12-year-old girl when you lost your dad, I'm sorry, that's still very fresh and still very painful your entire life. So they have made a studious a study, if you will, of avoiding many folks trying to write these books. But I got to Bruce Lynn. He is the director of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. He had built a lot of trust with these families, and he let me borrow his trust, his credibility with them. And the family members were uniformly wonderful. They were reluctant at first. They were very careful. They're talking about their fathers and uncles and cousins' legacies and so on. But we built the trust up, and I had them read all their sections before they went out to make sure they were accurate. And they were saying what they wanted to say. So I believe that all of them are now pleased that they have talked. But as you already read it. It makes all the difference. This is the story that no one really has before. And it felt very good, not from a commercial point of view, but from a personal point of view, to let these people tell their stories about their families. They're not famous people and they're not rich people. And I often write college football books, when I deal with both, rich and famous. So it's refreshing in that sense. But they ultimately, I think, felt that it was cathartic to make sure that the story got out before it's too late and got out accurately. So that part felt very good.
Well, what I appreciate is you can tell, it's hard to say fun, but you had real gratitude towards these people. I mean, your sections with Tom Walton specifically, I said, John's having a great time with this guy. He's loving these stories. They're engaging, and you're getting just so much. And I felt like that really adds to this because the Edmund Fitz it's tough to cover because, as you talked about, 29. Go down. We don't know exactly what happened. We're never going to know precisely what happened. So filling in around it is kind of the requirement to really tell the story, right?
Undeniably true. Perhaps because the song is not funny, and Gordon Lightfoot was very deeply respectful, as we'll probably talk later on, toward the families. But because of the song, people often make jokes online and so on. And I don't think I would have done that before. I'm sure I never did. But I definitely would not do that now. These are real lives, obviously. But part that was, I think, gratifying and fun, if you will, was talking to guys like Tom Walton, who served on the Fitz in 1963 as a deckhand while in college at Bowling Green University. He had a great summer, and his dad ended up being the chief engineer on that ship that summer, who ended up surviving. His uncle ended up being on that ship when it went down. So those are obviously sad stories. But when you hear about the ship in its heyday and shipping in its heyday and what these lives were like, look, John Tanner, the former superintendent of the Great Lakes Maritime Academy, the only one on the Great Lakes, everything else is on the coast, he said it best. He said, look, everyone knows the farmer, everyone knows the factory worker, everyone knows the miner. We know what those lives are like. No one knows the sailor. No one knows the shipper. But that's where all your stuff comes from. The cement in your basement, the steel on your car, in the driveway, the food on your table comes from these gigantic ships. And we don't know much about them because they're on the seas 9 months out of the year. They're not in your Rotary Club. They're not coaching your baseball team. They're not, directing your Boy Scouts. So you don't know these people. But these are the people we rely on incredibly to get all our stuff going. If the Soo Locks, the bottleneck of this operation between Lake Superior and Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, all the other downward lakes, if that was clogged, trust me, it would cripple the U.S. economy.
Well, I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. For somebody who hasn't been on the lakes, understands how large they are, what kind of shipping goes through there, how do you describe and explain to somebody that when we say Great Lakes, that adjective really does apply?
No one really knows how great they are until you're in the middle of them. I was just on a ship again, the Wilfred Sykes, which is one of the most important ships in this story, last week, thanks to Tom Wyatter and other folks at Central Marine Logistics. I was out there with a New York Times reporter and photographer, and they were just stunned. If you're on the middle, you can't see Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, etc. You can't see either shore when you're in the middle of these things. They're not lakes, they're inland seas, basically. And if you're on the coast, you have no sense of how big they are. And Brendan, one of my challenges, and I think I even just said this in the book at some point, is just trying to describe the scale of everything I'm talking about. I can tell you about the Grand Canyon. I can show you photographs. But until you stand on the edge of the doggone thing and see just the unbelievable vastness and depth of it, you really can't understand that. And Garrison Keillor, the great writer, he had a great line. He said, our Grand Canyon in the Midwest is underwater. So these things are immense. They function like seas. The waves function like seas. As you know, I make a pretty strong case that sailing in the Great Lakes is as dangerous, if not more so, than sailing on the oceans themselves, which people would have no idea of. I had no idea of this, and I grew up in Michigan, so I should have known better. But the scale of the lakes, the scale of these ships run 700 feet to 1,000 feet. Think about a 100-story skyscraper, talking about New York here now, places like that. That's how big these things are. They're incredible. The Fitz itself would carry so much iron ore in the form of taconite, these little pebbles, that they've carried enough to build 7,000 cars with each single shipment. That's insane, but that's what they did.
It's an absolutely insane number. And when you're talking about the Great Lakes, how dangerous it can be, it's in the title, the Gales of November. Why is November the most dangerous time? And I mean, we tie it to one of the events that I don't understand how we don't know more about it, the White Hurricane. Can you talk about that?
Well, first of all, the lakes are a lot more dangerous than people think. A, they're just that big. B, unlike when you sail across the ocean, look, anyone who's sailing for a living is, and by sailing we mean shipping, they're all taking their chances. It takes courage in all cases and skill. But if you are a captain on a salty, which is what they call ocean-going ships, on the salt water, of course, those guys leave New York. They put it on autopilot until they get to Portugal or wherever. You can't run into anything pretty much in the middle of the ocean. And then when they get close, a harbor pilot and a tugboat take over that ship and guide it in. The captain has almost nothing to do with it. Whereas in the Great Lakes, only about 2/3 of your time is in open seas, and 1/3 you're leaving congested ports in Duluth or Superior, Wisconsin, Detroit, Cleveland, Chicago, Buffalo, etc. Or you're getting into those ports, or going through the Soo Locks, or going through tight canals. The Cuyahoga, the term, actually means crooked river. It's got like 18 turns you got to navigate just to get to the factories of Cleveland. That requires a whole lot of skill, and a lot of guys don't have it. So that's a thing there, of course. Salt water versus fresh water. I didn't know this either, and I've swum in every Great Lake. Fresh water is more dangerous than salt water. The salt brings down the waves, it blunts the tops, it spreads them out. So Great Lake waves are twice as close together as ocean waves. That can be a lot of problems, of course. They're taller and sharper and spikier at the top, mountain peaks, basically. And, of course, they freeze a lot faster because salt water is hard to freeze and fresh water is not. And all these things add up. Now, long story short, for November, here's what happens in the Great Lakes. The lakes are almost always a month or two behind the air as far as going through the seasons. So in the spring, the air is warm. It's in the 60s in May, but the water is still cold. It's a month or two behind. No problem in the spring. That keeps the water down. But in November, the opposite happens. The air is cold and the water is warm. It can be like 20, 30 degrees difference. This is not safe. This is not healthy. What happens when you boil water in your home? The steam rises and floats away. Well, those are the waves. They want to move up towards the warm air. They want to escape. And now you've got serious trouble. And that's why November 10th, which is the day that the Fitz went down, is the single most dangerous day in the history of the Great Lakes. November is the scariest month on the Great Lakes. And in December, when you start getting ice and so on, that can be dangerous too. But it's much calmer because now the lakes have calmed down and they've settled. So November is your scariest month every year on the Great Lakes.
The White Hurricane, you talk about it a little bit here, but that's another one where you could have 3 books on that and not cover everything.
And people have written many books on the White Hurricane. The White Hurricane is 1913. It was the storm of the century at the time in 1913. They thought it was going to last a century. 1975, the Fitz's storm, I believe, tops it based on the size of the waves and the speed of the wind. But this is a 3-day hurricane in 1913, and it covers the same days pretty much that the Edmund Fitzgerald ran through. It's happened on 3 lakes, not just Superior. Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron. I think it was like 20 boats, 20 ships were lost. About 300 men and women on ships, and I described several of these issues. It's just insane. And they thought in 1913 that was going to be the storm of the century. And they were off, of course, by about 62 years, 62 years later, it was enough time for all the sailors and all the people, all the officials running the ports to forget the lessons of 1913.
On top of all of this, and the other books, I don't remember ever seeing this. The Mighty Fitz was also so well known because it was the best for a while. It was doing lots of shipping, but it was basically also set up for tourists to just be like, hey, I'm gonna take a little cruise on the Mighty Fitz. Could you tell me about this? I never remember reading about this.
That shocked me. This thing's carrying, again, 26,000 long tons, which is a British measurement. It's basically about 30,000 normal tons of taconite. Taconite is these little clay iron pebbles that they manufacture in Silver Bay. They're dirty, they're loud, they're nasty, all this stuff. And yet, they would have these spectacular VIP quarters, which were the equal, watch this, one reporter at the time described, and the staterooms have deep pile carpeting, tiled bathrooms, stately drapes over the portholes, plus a glass and observation lounge where guests could sit in leather swivel chairs and look out into the ship itself and the vastness of the Great Lakes all around her. The best galley, the best food, better than any cruise ship then running. And one reporter who'd been on the ship said, magnificent, certainly the equal of anything then available on commercial ocean liners, like the Queen Elizabeth, for example. So my question was, okay, great, but why were you doing this? Who cares? You're paid to deliver taconite, not VIPs. And someone made the very key point. Well, where does the taconite contracts come from? Who's buying the taconite? It's National Steel, it's Ford Motor Company, it's General Motors, etc. Well, guess what? They got executives. Those executives got wives back then, spouses, of course. And you can offer them something you can't pay for. You can't get anywhere else. And that's the spectacular 5-6 day round trip from the top of the lakes, Lake Superior, down to Gary, Indiana, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, etc., and then back up. And they gushed about it every time. And always the hero of the trip was the chef, because they all said it's the best food they ever had. So that's where those contracts come from. And they did one more thing. They also made the living quarters of the 29 crewmen the best on the Great Lakes. And again, I think, okay, why are you doing that? Because they wanted to attract the best crew out of 300 ships on this ship, retain their loyalty and retain their hard work. So you want to make sure you don't get bumped off the Edmund Fitzgerald. And it worked on both cases. So all that opulence they spent, and they hired J.L. Hudson, then the greatest department store probably in the country, out of Detroit, to do all these fancy things, and it worked very, very well.
Sounds nicer than my house, but neither here nor there.
Mine too, Brendan, mine too. Hey, but in fairness to us, our budget was a lot less.
Yeah, a lot less. Well,
theirs.
And this is really what it comes down to, right? Because we've already set this up. The Great Lakes can be very dangerous, especially in November. So, of course, shipping stops on November 1st, right? They say, we're putting all this money into these boats, these ships. We are not going to put them in danger by sending anybody out in November, right?
Of course they don't do that, because there's money to be had. And one of my favorite lines that I could not help but use in this bit was Willie Sutton, famous bank robber from the 20s and 30s, was once asked, apparently, why do you rob banks? And he's alleged to have said, because that's where the money is. All right, if it's this dangerous and this uncomfortable and people lose their lunch and you miss your families for 9 months and so on, it's a very hard life in many ways. If it's that hard, why do it? And the answer is our raw materials. And first beaver pelts, and then timber, and then grain, and then copper, and then iron. Those are 5 essential elements. Well, guess what? That stuff comes from Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan's Upper Peninsula. That's where the stuff is. So you got to get all that stuff down from the top head of the lakes to the mills and the factories and so on in the south. And that's how the economy hums.
So speaking of making money, I also didn't know this one. Well, I should say, I've heard this before, but you actually break it down, the Plimsoll line. If I said that right, you tell me. If I didn't, what is that and how does it kind of affect what we're talking about here?
What's embarrassing, Brendan, a lot of things are embarrassing perhaps, but I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan. My parents, my grandfather, always had a cottage in northern Michigan attached to the Great Lakes. I've been in the Great Lakes my entire life, and I knew almost nothing about this. So one of those things was the Plimsoll line. Samuel Plimsoll was a politician in England in the 1840s and 50s and 60s. And what they would do in the old days, these very cynical ship owners, they would run incredibly dangerous ships, load them with way too much stuff, and then take out insurance policies, gigantic insurance policies against their ships. So when they sunk, they made even more money, which is a rather evil way to make your millions. So Plimsoll said this is crazy. And during Dickensian England, he created the Plimsoll line, named for him, which they painted on the side of the ship. That is how far down your ship can go in the water and still sail safely. At first, everyone ignored it and screw you and so on, because we're making money, until Lloyd's of London said, if you don't meet the Plimsoll line, we are not insuring you. And if you cheat on it, we don't have to pay you anything. So all of a sudden, again, they listen to the buck, or the pound in that case. The Plimsoll line determines how low you can go in the water and still sail safely. Now, you know where I'm going with this one, of course, because you've read the book. The Edmund Fitzgerald was allowed 14 feet and some of what's called freeboard. Freeboard is how much boat you have to have out of the water. It's about 39 feet deep as a rule. The whole ship was up to the deck, but only 14 feet had to be above the water. So you're allowed to basically 25 feet below that. And then, for some reason, well, I know why, it's to make money, but the U.S. Coast Guard and the ABS, which governs these things, the American Bureau of Shipping, I believe it is, they all of a sudden in 69, 71, and 73 allowed the Fitzgerald and all the other ships of various ratios, but in Fitzgerald's case, to drop 3.5 feet, basically, from the original number to sink 3.5 feet deeper into the water than before. And it wasn't designed for that. It was built in 1958, finished in 1958, with very clear specs of what it can and cannot handle. And now all of a sudden you're dropping down, you're dropping from 14-some feet to 11-some feet. And I'm sorry, but you know what? It gets more and more dangerous every time you do these things. And on top of that, the Fitzgerald, like almost all the other ships on the Great Lakes, those crew members knew how to cheat on the Plimsoll line in very clever ways, which the book explains. So basically, this ship was carrying hundreds of tons, thousands of tons, more than it was designed to carry on its last voyage.
And there's another deadly sin we can't forget about, which is this was a competition. Every day was a competition between these ships. So we're not even talking about the guys up, making the millions. The sailors themselves, the ships, the captains, they wanted to be the best, the fastest, to put as much out there as possible. That can cause some problems too, can't it?
It was money and it was ego. And that's a powerful combination. We've seen it elsewhere, of course. But as I said in the book, they always say time is money. And these guys heard that phrase constantly from the captain to the deckhand, move, move, move. These ships did only three things. They loaded, they sailed, or they unloaded. As one of the former deckhands of the Fitz said, no one is paying us for pleasure cruises. All right, no joyrides on these ships. So you're always moving in almost any weather. And a captain also would get bonuses once they reached their quota for the year. They would get bonuses based on how they performed thereafter. And Captain McSorley, we'll get to him, he was a very good captain, a very good guy. No question about it. But these guys got their bonuses, in a great line from one of my sources, Rick Barthuli, who was an engineer, second engineer on the Arthur Anderson, which chased the Fitzgerald that night. He said, and his captain said, Bernie Cooper, captain of the Anderson, you don't haul 1 million tons of iron ore a year by laying on the hook, which means dropping anchor when it's nasty out there. You keep going. You're paid to go. If you spend time hiding in from bad weather, you're going to lose your job as the captain. They're going to hire somebody else. So both Cooper had a reputation for going in almost all weather, and McSorley, his reputation in almost all ways was unequaled. And very good captain, very good guy, but perhaps the most aggressive captain on the Great Lakes. And that's how you get to be the captain of the best ship in the Great Lakes, which is the Edmund Fitzgerald.
And you really put a fine point on that, because anybody who doesn't know this whole story before they read the book, they're going to say, well, the ship sunk, the captain must have sucked. But like you're saying, whoever was in charge of the Fitz was most likely the best out there. But even the best captain could put himself in a situation that he can't get out of, right?
Yeah, I mean, unlike some books, I'm certainly not here to castigate Captain Ernest McSorley and dump on him and blame it all on him. It's too complicated, for one thing. But he did make some decisions that probably added to the odds of the ship going down. The cruel irony, Brendan, is that this guy who was go, go, go almost at all times, and yet that night he made 3 decisions that went against his usual aggressiveness. He knew this was his last trip. All right, it was his last trip. His wife was waiting for him in Toledo. He was going to get a bonus for this trip that would have paid for the medical care that she needed, possibly a surgery, possibly cancer, I think. This was for her, this final trip. And he and a handful of other guys on his ship, including his best friend, were all going to retire at the end of this last run. On November 12th was the plan in Toledo. But as I said in the book, and you know this, if being a Great Lakes captain were an Olympic pentathlon consisting of 5 events, McSorley would probably win piloting, racing, recruiting a great staff, leading his crew, and finishing high enough in the 5th event, VIP relations, that no other Great Lakes captain could challenge him for the top spot on the podium. He was the best. And I've got one of his former crewmen, Craig Sullivan. He said, McSorley had ice in his veins, a great pilot too. I was on the stern at Silver Bay once when the big boats from Cleveland Cliffs were already at the docks. Doesn't leave a lot of room. Well, Captain McSorley came in, swung it around, then slipped 729 feet of steel in a slot between the freighters with just a few extra feet, like he was parallel parking his pickup truck. McSorley was the best shipman I've ever seen. He was the best in the Great Lakes, that's for sure, and everybody knew it. And I've heard that from a lot of guys. But that night, the normally aggressive McSorley, what does he do? He lets the Anderson get ahead of him for a few hours, which he never did, because it was pretty rough out there. They take the northern route because of the storm coming in around Lake Superior, which adds 14 hours to their trip, which is safer for the most part, but it puts them in unfamiliar terrain, including Caribou Island and 6 Fathom Shoal, which are in the middle, basically, of Lake Superior. So he's not used to those maps, they call them charts. That was a problem. And finally, at the end, when he knows he's taking on water and they're listing pretty severely, he waits basically an hour for the Anderson to catch up because his radars are out. He can't see anything. He's sailing blind. He needs Anderson's help to guide him in. Well, while he's doing that, his ship is filling with water, and he might not have known that. So the tragedy is when he finally was cautious, it might have been at the exact wrong time. But I maintain he made the best decisions possible based on the information that he had. Problem is he didn't have all the information.
I will say that you really try and play it straight down the middle for everybody. However, I think there is at least one person that I thought, John wants to punch this guy. And it was right when you're talking about that, he is calling in saying that he needs help. And you know what? I'll let you tell me what happens on the other end of that line.
Yes, this is a low-ranking Coast Guard member, and the Coast Guard, I can't say enough positive things about, and when you read the book, you know how many times those guys risk their own lives and often lose their own lives, saving people from horrible situations. They do an amazing job on many, many fronts. We owe them a great deal. We don't know this guy much. So, Petty Officer Philip Branch, at one point late in the night on November 10th, Captain Bernie Cooper of the Anderson has not heard from the Fitz in 10, 20, 30 minutes. So he's calling it in, trying to call in. No one's answering. Then he gets this guy, Philip Branch, and he's not responsive. And Philip Branch tells him to change channels because the channel he's on is for emergencies. You have to wonder what emergency might have topped possibly, losing out of 300 ships, the greatest one on the Great Lakes with 29 men on it. That is crazy. And then he asked him to look out for a 16-foot boat, probably a pleasure craft that's out there for no good reason. And he's not getting this, obviously. Later on, he testified. And he said, and I quote, this is pretty amazing, I think. He said, I considered the Fitzgerald situation serious, but at the time, it was not urgent. And all I said was, Branch's answer defies explanation. He received no censure for his actions on November 10th. So I guess the Coast Guard found no wrong with it, I guess. There aren't too many villains in this one, and maybe he's not a villain, but in a situation where so many people, men and women, acted heroically, repeatedly, he did not meet that standard.
It's poor training right there is what that is. Something else, and this I think is really important, is you have the sinking, you have a lot of things that you dig into about the aftermath. Which I don't even want to touch on that. I want people to read that. It's so good. But the last piece that I think a lot of books about the Mighty Fitz will, and then there's a Gordon Lightfoot song, and that's very nice. You treat that as part of this story. That this isn't just a throwaway line on the last page about, hey, people really like the song, and it kind of keeps that story going. You really bring it in that, A, this was something that Gordon Lightfoot truly had strong feelings about, but also that was very well received by the survivors and families. Is that a choice where you're like, I haven't seen people really dig into this? How did you decide that this needed to be a good chunk of this?
There's a good writer, Jennings, who wrote a good biography of Gordon Lightfoot, called Lightfoot, that has some of this information in it, but I followed up. Lightfoot himself just passed away. I saw him play in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he passed away not long after that, so I never got a chance to talk to him. But I did got to become friends with Barry Keane, his great drummer, and Rick Haynes, his longtime bassist, and they were wonderful. They spelled it all out. First, how unlikely this song was to be created in the first place. The song you hear on the radio is not only the first take from the studio, it's the first time the guys in the band ever played it. They didn't know how the song went. They didn't know how it ended. They were just making it up. And they taped it many times after that, and none of them were as good as the first time. Gordon Lightfoot was a very good sailor who did the Port Huron to Mackinac race before. It's a serious race. And he had a very strong sense of this, and it's factually 98% accurate. So he cared a lot about it. But he's very nervous about it, getting it out there. And they finally got it out there, and it did extremely well with the audience. They were not expecting that at all. They were stunned by it, in fact. It was the number 2 song of 1976 behind Rod Stewart, actually. And at first, some of the family members didn't like it. Some of the crew didn't like it because they were afraid that, he's exploiting them. And then they listened to it some more, and most of them liked it right away. And then everyone else came on board with it, if you will, after that. And now they play it to this day, 50 years later, at the family reunions, where the grandkids who never knew their grandfathers, they know their grandfathers from this song. And let's be honest, Brendan, without that song, there is no book. There are at least 6,000 shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. Some say 10,000, some say as many as 25,000. And you probably know one of them, and it's because Gordon Lightfoot did such an amazing job with that song.
I mean, that was something that really struck me too, is we're two history nerds talking, right? We know the White Hurricane. We know all of these different things that have happened on the Great Lakes. But for somebody who isn't into history like we are, they might know the name, the Edmund Fitzgerald, from that song. And it keeps going. I mean, I finished the book. I threw on my headphones, and there's quite a few plays on that bad boy still.
Oh, absolutely. And look, I mean, the title of the book comes from his lyrics, The Gales of November. I think 3 or 4 of the chapters come from that song as well. If you look at those books on the shelf, I don't think there's a single book written about the Fitz that did not derive its title from that song. That song imprints all of it, luckily, for all of us writing in its wake, if you will. He got it right. And also in a way that no writer can otherwise reach. He evoked what it felt like to be on that ship in an incredible way and was sensitive about it. He ended up becoming very close with the family members themselves, often talking to them on their deathbeds even. That's how close they became. He was very respectful and actually has funded a few scholarships in their name. The Great Lakes Maritime Academy, where 2 of the 29 men had served. There's no question that Lightfoot himself is a hero in this story.
All right, so if I can magically get you to talk to anybody that you weren't able to interview for this book, living or dead, give you an hour with them, one person from the book, who would it be?
Can't lie, Ernest McSorley. He's, of course, someone I did not get to any of his family members. They're gone. He did not have any children himself. His wife had 3 children who were all grown adults, 30s and 40s. Never got to him, obviously. So I'd love to talk to him and ask his thinking at that time and what he knew, what he didn't know. Again, a great guy by all accounts, the best captain of the Great Lakes, and the crew loved him. But I'd also like to add, if I can cheat.
You can. I'll allow it.
Bruce Hudson is a 22-year-old deckhand. He'd gone to Oberlin College in Ohio, a very good school in Ohio State. He dropped out of the forestry program to hop on the Great Lakes, and he was very good at this work, and he liked it. He always said he's going to go back to Ohio State and finish up his degree, and maybe he would have. His girlfriend, Cindy, in Toledo, when he's on the ship that fall, he finds out that she's pregnant, and he's going to go on a cross-country road trip in his muscle car with one of his fellow deckhands, and she allows him to do that anyway, but then they're going to go get together, get an apartment, and raise the child together, and that's one of those lives that was interrupted, of course. So if there's one guy I want to bring back, it'd be Bruce Hudson.
What's so crazy, you already talked about it, is there were so many guys that this wasn't conjecturing, this isn't pulling on heartstrings. There were guys who were done after this. Like, this was it, they were walking away. And usually that's a trope used in TV movies, right, to just make you feel even worse. Like, he was one day from retirement, but that was the case for so many of these guys, and it just adds so much more sadness onto something that, well, sucks enough already.
Right. Well, you've already said this basically, and you've, I think, noted it throughout. I was very careful with, I spent 3.5 years in this thing. I did a ton of research, interviews, archives, you name it, whatever's out there. So I think I got to know it about as well as anybody could as a non-expert. I'm not a navigational authority, obviously. I also got to Craig Elquist. Craig Elquist was a deckhand on the Fitz in November, December, and January of 74, 75. He was going to be back on the ship that spring, but decided to be a milkman in Two Harbors, Minnesota instead, and therefore he missed the last trip. But he'd always see him when they're in port, and they'd have beers and so on. They're still very close to these guys. He and others told me without question that was going to be the last trip of the season. Normally they'd go to January, but they needed repairs apparently. So that was going to be the last trip. He also knew from January that there's an open question whether McSorley and 4 or 5 of his older crewmates were going to come back for the 75 season at all. And so once they decided to come back, that was definitely going to be their last season. And this was going to be their last trip, which also Craig Elquist and others, in fact, confirmed. If I didn't have the facts nailed down on this thing, I would say you can't go there. It's just too much of a Hollywood story. But that was the reality for 20% of the crew. This is going to be the last trip of their lives.
You talked about all the research you did for this. From one nerd to another, do you ever get the time to read nonfiction just for fun? Or if you don't want to answer that one, do you have any nonfiction friends whose books you want to plug that they're coming out?
Well, I do. The sad fact is when I'm writing a book, I don't read nearly enough, and I feel bad about that. Because if I don't have time to read, I better be reading the stack of books behind me on everything from taconite to the Plimsoll line to the weather of the Great Lakes, and you name it, not just about the Fitz itself. So I feel guilty reading anything for pleasure. But I can't deny that some of these guys are friends of mine, some of these guys are contacts, some are just writers that I clearly admire. I admire David Gran, his great book on the wager from the 1700s. That was a wonderful book there. Douglas Brinkley wrote Moonshot, along with many other great books with Stephen Ambrose. Moonshot was about the whole Apollo program and how it came to be. Doug Stanton, In Harm's Way, about the USS Indianapolis. Hampton Sides, The Wide, Wide Sea, about James Cook, the famous explorer, of course. And those are all nautically based, not Moonshot, of course, but how you tell one of these kind of real-life thrillers, basically. Jonathan Eig, I think is fantastic. I've been reading him for 20 years. His book on Lou Gehrig, as well as his book on Martin Luther King, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize. You talk about guts, me taking on this book, nowhere near the guts of taking on Martin Luther King, Jr., of course. He's been written about before, very successfully, very capably. And Jonathan took it on and won the Pulitzer Prize, and deservedly so. So those are a few of my literary heroes on that list alone.
I want to add one. I was just looking at your email signature. Apparently, Ken Burns loves this one. I mean, that's got to feel good. That's got to feel like the gold standard right there. That,
from my point of view, is as good as it gets. Of course, he read it thoroughly, and he seemed to really enjoy it, and I've talked to his assistant about that as well. Ken Burns happens to be from Ann Arbor as well. He went to Ann Arbor Pioneer, graduated in 1971. I went to the other high school and graduated in 1982, Ann Arbor Huron. I know Ken Burns a little bit, only a little bit, is all I'd ever claim. So he owed me nothing on this one. It's not like, some quid pro quo, we're pals or whatever. So getting that sterling endorsement from Ken Burns felt particularly good.
Well, John, listen, obviously I love the book, right? But there are certain people who'll be out there saying, nonfiction, that's not my thing. History, this sounds sad. We know they're poor, misguided souls. But if one of them sat in front of you and they said, John, why should I read The Gales of November? What are you going to say?
Do you like a good story? And it's obviously a sad story and a tragic story, but it's an amazing story of the Great Lakes, of shipping, of these men's lives, their families' lives, the wives and the sons and the daughters, as Gordon Lightfoot said, about the song, about what it means now, about why we've not had a single commercial shipwreck on the Great Lakes since the Edmund Fitzgerald went down November 10th, 1975. That is an amazing record because 6,000 went down the 100 years before that. Pretty amazing. So it's a very compelling story, I think. And what I've seen so far in the reviews from Kirkus and Ken Burns and others is that, it's a page turner. But back to Ken Burns. I mean, he is the gold standard. He reinvented documentary filmmaking. He's without question the greatest documentary filmmaker of all time, quantity and quality. But he does something that is so vital. And whenever someone tells me that history is boring, no. As we say in journalism, by the way, there are no boring stories, only boring storytellers. Then you have a weak history teacher or a weak history writer. What Ken Burns does so well is what I tried to do in this book. He takes you back to that moment, the moment of truth, where Robert E. Lee or General Grant or President Lincoln did not know what was going to happen next. They had to make some tough decisions based on insufficient data and hope like heck. It turned out appropriately. It turned out well for everybody, for the people involved. And that's what I tried to do here. They did not know on November 9th. It was an unbelievably nice day in Superior, Wisconsin, near Duluth. It was in the 70s. It never happens in November. They had no reason to think they were in trouble going forward. This is going to be the last trip. Looking forward to it. Bruce Hudson's muscle car is waiting for him at the docks of Toledo. And McSorley's wife is waiting for him in the docks of Toledo. This is going to be a fun victory lap, basically. So they had no idea what was going to happen next. Take the reader back to that moment and have them get in their shoes. And you realize how courageous this was, how tough it was, and how, of course, ultimately tragic it really was. But you can't, I think, fully feel the tragedy unless you care about the people first.
Well, John, I agree with Ken Burns. I'm sure that means just as much to you, of course, but the book is fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on and talk about it.
Brendan, a true pleasure.
And that's it for this episode. John, thank you so much. Gales of November. Just trust me. Get it. You know I wouldn't lie to you. I haven't lied to you up until get this book. It's awesome. In the meantime, hit us up, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Until next time, nerds, stay cool.